Welcome to the shadows. This is Mrs. Sinister, where terrifying tales lull you to sleep. Jen always thought her life took a turn the moment she first attended a Bible study session, dragged there by a high school classmate who kept inviting her week after week. Her family wasn't religious, never the type to step into a church except for weddings or funerals, but something clicked inside her during that one quiet evening with people singing praises and reading scripture. From then on, she found herself returning, drawn by a sense of belonging she never knew she craved. Over the years, her devotion grew, and she became one of the most reliable volunteers in her congregation. Whenever there was a need, Jen was there. Organizing, cleaning, preparing, assisting in outreach programs, and serving in any way she could. When the pastor announced there would be a baptism by the beach for new members of the church, Jen immediately volunteered to help with the preparations. The location they rented was a private stretch of shoreline connected to a resort hotel. It wasn't her family's style to spend money on vacations like that, but the church budget covered it, and for Jen, it felt like a blessing. The congregation would have access to both the beach and the hotel for a whole weekend, and while she knew it was for the work of the ministry, she couldn't help but feel a little joy in the chance to spend a night at the seaside. The day before the baptism, Jen busied herself alongside other volunteers. They set up tables for food and refreshments, stacked plastic chairs, and arranged tents for shade. They placed banners near the designated area for the baptism itself. Bright cloth signs bearing Bible verses about salvation and new life. The salty breeze was strong, and the sound of waves crashing rhythmically against the shore filled the air. The sun was high, painting the sand a blinding white, and the water a shifting canvas of blues and greens. Even though they were working, Jen felt like she was on a vacation postcard. By late afternoon, everything that could be prepared in advance was done. The volunteers and church leaders gathered in the hotel for dinner and prayer. Laughter and chatter filled the dining hall. Everyone seemed excited for the next day, when dozens of new members would publicly declare their faith. For Jen, it was more than just an event. It was a celebration of transformation, a reminder of her own journey from curiosity to conviction. Night fell, and Jen retired to the modest but comfortable hotel room the church had arranged for volunteers. She showered, prayed, and lay down, but excitement made it hard to sleep. She thought about the baptism, about the faces of the people she knew would be going under the water tomorrow. It was a holy thing, symbolic of dying to the old self and rising again in new life. Somewhere past midnight, she drifted into a restless slumber, only to be jolted awake hours later by the persistent ring of her alarm. It was still dark when she got up. She wrapped herself in a jacket and slipped into her sandals. There were tasks left undone the night before. Things that couldn't be set up early because the wind or tide might ruin them. She carried a bag of supplies and quietly made her way to the beach. The world outside was hushed. The hotel lights glowed faintly behind her, but the sand stretched out ahead like a vast silver plain under the pale glow of the moon. The air was cooler now, damp with mist, and the sea looked darker, its surface rippling with restless movement. Jen found the designated area, planted some small flags, and began setting up the last of the decorations. It was lonely but peaceful. Then she noticed it. At first, it was subtle. Something shifting beneath the water's surface, a dark swell that didn't match the rhythm of the waves. She paused, squinting at the horizon. The shape was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the normal rise and fall of the sea. She shook her head, assuming it was just the tide playing tricks on her. She continued her work. A few minutes later, it happened again. A long, slow ripple cut across the water, like the back of something massive, moving beneath the surface. This time it lingered, rolling gently before sinking away. Jen's breath caught in her throat. She told herself it might be a school of fish or a shadow of the waves. But deep down, she knew it was neither. She became curious. She stepped closer to the water's edge, clutching her jacket tight against her body. The sea hissed as foam lapped at the sand. For a while, nothing stirred, and she felt almost silly for worrying. But then the third appearance came, and this time there was no mistaking it. A colossal body rose slightly above the surface, breaking the water with deliberate slowness. Jen saw glistening scales as large as her palms, each one catching the moonlight with a metallic shimmer. The body was serpentine, undulating as it moved. It wasn't the smooth skin of a whale or the rough hide of a crocodile. It was something ancient, armored, impossibly vast. Her chest tightened. The first word that came to her mind was dragon, like the ones she had seen in children's movies and fantasy books. But dragons weren't real. They couldn't be real. Yet, the sight before her defied any explanation she could give. The creature moved with a terrifying grace, coils slipping through the water as if the entire ocean belonged to it. Jen felt fear rising like bile in her throat. She couldn't run. She couldn't scream. She clasped her hands together instinctively, whispering prayers she didn't even fully form. She prayed for safety, for strength, for clarity, her lips trembling as her eyes stayed locked on the water. The serpent-like form lingered, circling lazily just beyond the shallow waves. It didn't thrash or attack. It simply moved. Its scales glinted whenever they breached the surface. For a brief, insane moment, Jen thought it was looking at her, even though she couldn't see ahead, only the vast, sinuous body. A cold dread spread through her veins as she realized the thing was larger than anything she had ever imagined, a living leviathan hiding in plain sight. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned away. Its body sank lower into the sea, disappearing into the black depths. The water calmed, ripples fading until only the regular motion of the tide remained. Jen stayed rooted in place, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She waited, half expecting the beast to re-emerge, but the surface stayed still. Slowly, she backed away from the shoreline, clutching her jacket as though it could shield her from what she had seen. When she finally turned and walked back toward the hotel, she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her, until she was well away from the water. Morning came, and with it, the baptism ceremony. The congregation gathered on the beach, their voices raised in praise and worship. Families smiled, children played in the sand, and the new members dressed in white garments stood ready to enter the water. Jen went about her duties as though nothing had happened, though her hands shook slightly when she handed out towels and cups of water. The baptism proceeded without incident. One by one, the new believers stepped into the sea, were lowered beneath the waves, and rose again, dripping and radiant. The pastor's voice rang clear over the surf, proclaiming the joy of salvation. The crowd cheered, clapped, and sang hymns. Through it all, Jen's eyes darted constantly to the horizon. She half expected the monstrous shape to return, to rise up and shatter the celebration. But the water remained calm, sparkling under the morning sun. There was no sign of scales, no ripple that didn't belong. When the ceremony ended and the congregation dispersed for food and fellowship, Jen sat quietly on the sand, staring out at the vastness of the sea. She replayed the night in her mind, every detail of the creature etched into her memory. She knew she couldn't tell anyone. They would laugh, dismiss it as a dream, or worse, think her faith was faltering. So she kept it to herself, carrying the weight of the vision like a secret burden. And yet, as the day went on, she realized something strange. Instead of crushing her faith, the encounter had strengthened it. She had seen something that should not exist, something beyond human understanding. Yet no harm had come to the church. No danger had disrupted the sacred ceremony. It was as if the sea itself had revealed a glimpse of its mysteries and then stepped aside, allowing the will of God to proceed unchallenged. For Jen, it was both terrifying and comforting. She knew she would never forget the sight of those glistening scales or the way her prayers had steadied her trembling heart. The creature was real. Of that she was certain. But so was her faith, and she clung to it with renewed fervor. Whatever lurked in the depths of creation, she believed, could never overpower the hand that held the universe together. Still, on quiet nights, when the wind carried the scent of salt water, Jen would close her eyes and see the serpent's body rolling beneath the waves. She would remember the shimmer of its scales, the weight of its presence, and the fear that had nearly undone her. She would pray again, not for safety, but for strength, to keep walking her path, despite the things that dwelled in the shadows of the world. The first summer of college was supposed to be easy for Lee. He had managed to get a part-time job as a lifeguard at the local beach, and unlike the stereotypes about rowdy crowds, the people that frequented this place were unusually laid back. Families with kids, couples on weekend breaks, friends looking for relaxation. None of them gave him trouble. He never had to blow the whistle, never had to scold anyone for pushing boundaries, and never had to pull anyone out of the water. It was a job he picked. Exactly for this reason, because he didn't want his summer break eaten up by stress. The pay was good enough, the hours were manageable, and sitting up high on the lifeguard chair gave him plenty of time to daydream while the sun baked the sand and the ocean shimmered in its lazy rhythm. He thought of it like being paid to be a spectator, and with his headphones tucked discreetly under his cap, it sometimes felt like he was lounging more than working. The days blurred together, like waves rolling to shore. Hot mornings were filled with sunscreen smells, sizzling barbecues, and laughter. Evenings carried the salt-tinged coolness of the breeze, the beach slowly emptying as people packed up and drifted away. Lee grew familiar with the regulars. Old couples who walked the shoreline holding hands, kids with colorful floaties, young men testing their courage in the surf. Nothing ever escalated to danger. At times he almost wished something would happen, if only to give him a reason to test the training drilled into his body during certification. Yet secretly, he was relieved every night when he went home dry, his rescue tube untouched. That particular summer day began the same. The sun was merciless, its rays beating down until the sand almost burned his soles. Umbrellas sprouted like mushrooms across the shore, people spread on towels and mats, children ran into the surf, and lifeguards rotated shifts in their towers. Lee wiped sweat from his forehead as he scanned the waters. The air shimmered from heat. He could hear distant squeals of joy, the steady splash of waves, the faint strains of music from portable speakers. It was the same peaceful monotony he had come to expect. But by mid-afternoon, the weather shifted. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon with unnatural speed, casting shadows that swallowed the golden glow. The sea darkened, turning from azure to a steel gray that reflected the approaching storm. Wind whipped against the umbrellas and sent mats tumbling. The first drops of rain pattered like small stones, and soon a curtain of water descended, heavy and relentless. Shouts and laughter turned to hurried voices as most people packed up in a rush, dragging bags, gathering children, folding chairs with frantic hands. Within minutes, the once crowded beach was nearly deserted, only a handful of stubborn or unbothered visitors remaining under the drizzle. Lee stayed at his post, pulling his jacket tighter and scanning the now rougher waves. The water surged higher, churning, but not yet violent. He thought the storm would pass quickly, as many summer showers did. He was about to climb down to check on the last group of people when something caught his eye. A flash of yellow far beyond where swimmers usually went. He squinted through the rain, certain he saw a small figure struggling against the water. His pulse spiked. A child, too far out. The unmistakable jerky flailing of someone about to go under. His body moved before his mind caught up. He blew the whistle sharply, though the sound seemed swallowed by the storm. He leapt from the tower, feet pounding the wet sand as he sprinted toward the surf, clutching his rescue buoy. Adrenaline surged through his veins, half excitement, half terror. Finally, this was it. the moment he had trained for. His chest burned as he dove into the waves, the cold shock of water biting against his heated skin. He kicked furiously, arms slicing, eyes locked on the glimpse of yellow bobbing in the distance. The ocean pushed against him, every stroke a battle. The child's head went under. He dove, lungs straining, vision blurry in the murky depths. Fingers brushed against something, soft, trailing strands. Hair. He grabbed desperately, but it slipped from his grip like smoke. He surfaced, gasping, then plunged again. This time, he caught a hand, tiny and slick, but it slid away as though coated with oil. He coughed, dove again, teeth gritted. Each attempt brought him closer, but never enough, as if the water itself resisted him. The yellow fabric flashed once, then vanished completely into darkness. Chest aching, he surfaced and gasped for breath, blinking the rain from his eyes. He dove again and again until his muscles trembled, but the girl was gone. No splash, no hair, no yellow. Just endless gray water rolling back and forth, mocking his helplessness. His rescue buoy floated nearby. Useless. Panic set in, and he realized he needed backup. Kicking hard, he turned back toward the shore, heart hammering with dread. He staggered onto the sand, dripping and breathless, and immediately grabbed the radio. His voice cracked as he reported a drowning, insisting a child was out there. Within minutes, other lifeguards hurried over, their expressions tense. But as Lee pointed frantically to the spot, the people nearby looked at him with confusion. They said no one had been drowning. They said they saw nothing. Families shook their heads, assuring him all their children were safe. Strangers denied witnessing anyone in trouble. He insisted there was a girl in yellow clothes, but no parent stepped forward, no frantic cries filled the air. The beach remained strangely calm. Other lifeguards questioned him with doubt in their eyes. They asked if he was sure, if maybe he was disoriented in the rain, if the waves had played tricks on his vision. He tried to defend himself, insisting he touched hair, he held a hand, but their silence pressed heavily against his certainty. They conducted a brief sweep but found nothing. No missing person was reported. No belongings abandoned on the sand. No witnesses. No girl. As the hours dragged on, the storm cleared and the sun sank low. The official stance was simple. False alarm. The other lifeguards patted his shoulder, some sympathetic, some skeptical. They told him fatigue, bad visibility, or imagination might have created the illusion. He wanted to argue, but the emptiness in their eyes made words die in his throat. At the end of the shift, the incident was quietly dropped. No report filed. No follow-up needed. Che had always been drawn to discipline. While her classmates drifted between fads and fleeting obsessions, she found herself at the gym, grinding her fists against pads, rolling on the mats, tasting her own sweat and blood. She wasn't the most talented fighter, but she had the kind of stubborn fire that refused to go out, the kind that only grew hotter the more she was tested. She wasn't afraid of pain, not afraid of losing. What scared her more was mediocrity, of wasting her youth, never knowing if she could have become something great. So when the opportunity came to join a training camp by the sea with her teammates, she jumped on it. 2 weeks, away from the noise of the city, away from distractions, with nothing but hard training, camaraderie, and the kind of environment that could forge fighters. The gym they visited was only 20 minutes from the beach. Every morning, before the sun could pierce the horizon, the trainers barked them awake. They drilled footwork, strikes, sprawls, and chokes until their muscles burned. They napped after lunch, then repeated it all again in the afternoon. By evening, when the fiery sky began to dim, they jogged along the shoreline. Sometimes they shadow-boxed by the waves, sometimes they sprawled in the sand. The air smelled of salt, their feet sank in soft resistance, and though exhausted, Che loved every moment. She was young, her body resilient. Every strike she threw seemed sharper, every sprawl quicker, every breath deeper. She wanted to do more than what the coaches asked. More effort, she told herself, meant she could rise faster than her peers. She wasn't satisfied with being promising. She wanted to be undeniable. So, while the others slept, she woke even earlier than the trainers and slipped out of the dormitories. At first, it was just push-ups and stretches. Then she started jogging. Before sunrise, when the beach was empty, the sea dark and moody, she pushed her legs through the sand. The first few days were uneventful. The waves roared, gulls circled overhead, and her body grew stronger. Sweat soaked through her hoodie until it clung like a second skin, her thighs burning with the drag of each stride. She relished it, telling herself these secret miles would be her weapon in the cage. But one morning, when the sky was still deep in the navy and the stars were only just beginning to fade, she saw something that shattered the rhythm of her world. A woman stood ahead of her, wearing white. The garment was thin, almost glowing in the half-light, the kind of white that resisted shadow. Che slowed, her instincts prickling. She didn't recall anyone else being out this early. The woman was walking, barefoot, straight toward the water. At first, Che thought maybe she was a local, maybe even someone intent on swimming at dawn. But something about the way her steps seemed too smooth unsettled her. Her hair hung long and dark, unmoving even though the breeze whipped at Che's own. A cold unease coiled in Che's chest, but when the woman reached the water's edge, what happened next rooted her to the sand. Instead of sinking into the sea, the woman's feet did not break the surface. She floated, weightless, above the water, walking against the wind as though the laws of the world did not apply to her. The waves passed beneath her untouched. The salt spray did not dampen her gown. Che's breath hitched. The hours of sparring, the endless laps on the mats, the heavy bag drills. None of it prepared her for this. Her body wanted to sprint forward, to drag the woman back, to demand explanation. But her legs refused to move. Her jaw clenched as she tried to convince herself it was fatigue or some trick of dawn light. Yet her gut screamed otherwise. The woman floated farther, drifting unnaturally, until the horizon swallowed her. Che stumbled back, trembling. Her lungs burned not from exertion, but from terror. She turned and ran, not for endurance, but for escape, refusing to look over her shoulder. By the time she reached the gym, the sun was rising, and her teammates were stretching. She buried herself in the routine, hitting pads, taking sprawls, grunting through weight drills, trying to drown the memory with sweat. But when they returned to the beach later that evening, Che hung back. The waves that had seemed playful now looked sinister, concealing secrets in their depths. She refused to wade in, refused to let the water touch her ankles. When asked, she shrugged it off, muttering excuses about sore legs. That night, while her teammates laughed and joked over dinner, she stayed silent. She told them the truth once, halting, unsure, describing the woman in white walking across the water. But her words were met with chuckles, teasing, and disbelief. They dismissed it as exhaustion, as hallucination from overtraining. No one believed her. Che stopped going out alone in the mornings. She forced herself to stick with the group, though her eyes lingered often on the horizon. The beach, once a sanctuary for her, became a place of quiet dread. But the thing about fear is that it has a way of multiplying when ignored. That night, long after everyone had fallen asleep, Che woke with a dry throat. She slipped outside for water, only to find the air colder than it should have been. The distant crash of waves was louder, deeper, as though the sea itself was breathing. Drawn by something she couldn't name, she walked to the edge of the beach. The moon was high, lighting the sand silver. And there, far out in the surf, she saw her again. The woman in white, standing impossibly above the water, her head slowly turning toward the shore. Though distance separated them, Che felt the weight of her gaze, cold and ancient. The sea seemed to hush. Che staggered back, her stomach knotting. She wanted to scream for her teammates, but no sound left her lips. The woman began to drift closer, each step unnatural, unhurried, inexorable. Che bolted back to the dormitory, slamming the door shut behind her. She pressed her back against it, heart hammering, waiting for the sound of footsteps following. Nothing came, but sleep eluded her until dawn. The next morning, she trained harder than ever, perhaps to prove to herself that she was still anchored in the real world. But in every bead of sweat, every sharp inhale, she felt the memory pressing against her. She stopped running the beach altogether. Yet the sea did not stop calling. Each evening, when they gathered at the shore, she swore she saw faint figures moving where no swimmer should be. She thought she saw pale shapes gliding just beneath the surface, vanishing when she blinked. Her teammates teased her more when she avoided the water, not knowing the weight she carried. And Che, stubborn as she was, held it in. But inside, her conviction frayed. She was no longer sure whether she was witnessing hauntings, hallucinations, or something far worse. On the final night of the camp, as they celebrated their hard work, Che slipped away. Drawn by restless unease, she walked back to the beach alone. The waves glistened under moonlight, the air still. She told herself she would prove it wasn't real, that it was all stress. She stood at the edge of the tide, staring hard at the water. For long minutes, nothing happened. Relief began to loosen her chest. Then the water parted. A pale hand emerged, slender fingers trailing foam. Another followed, then a head, wet hair clinging to a face too pale, too sharp. The woman in white rose from the surf, not floating this time, but crawling toward her on all fours, movements jerky and insect-like. Her gown clung heavy and dripping, but her eyes burned with inhuman hunger. Che staggered back, fists clenched, fighter's instincts sparking uselessly against primal terror. The woman's mouth opened wide, far wider than it should, as though to swallow the night itself. The crash of waves drowned every sound except the pounding of Che's heart. She turned and ran, sprinting through the sand as the dragging scrape of limbs followed behind her. She didn't stop until the gym's lights came into view. She collapsed inside, gasping, drenched in sweat, not from training, but from horror. She never told the others what happened that night. She never jogged alone again. Do you have a terrifying tale of your own? Send your story to officialmrssinister@gmail.com. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Sleep tight, if you can. And remember, the things lurking in the dark are always watching.